Hello, we're going to start reviewing for chapter 1. It'll be a pretty quick video, or a lot of material. I'll probably just go through the kind of the chapter contents and some other things, and also we'll keep getting more familiar with this interface of my math labs. So here I am on the course home. Here's your calendar again. This view, as we go on through the year, this is giving me a view as me as a student. So later on, don't judge me for incomplete assignments or something like that. I'm not doing all the assignments as we go through this, but so here's the calendar, those kinds of things again. You can go to homework and quizzes and tests and those kinds of things and look at your grade book. The study plan is not fully operational. That's really more for using for a self-paced class. We're going to have due dates and those kind of things. I talked about that in the first video, that the homework is what I call a soft due date, like this first chapter review, which is, I think it's close to 60 problems. So there's a lot of problems in there. So hopefully you're getting going on this right away. But if you miss this due date, it'll still allow you to work on this until we get into chapter 4. And once we hit testing in chapter 4, I'll go back and any incomplete work, hopefully you don't ever have an incomplete quiz or test, because that would then go to a 0, which would dramatically affect your grade. These homework assignments are 10% of your grade. Again, the goal should be to get 100% on those things. You can use a lot of resources we'll talk about here too. And the quizzes are, you have multiple attempts, and I take the best score. But what I'm going to go to now is the online book, it has a lot of nice things in here, and I even use this in my in-class class that I teach. I'll pull this up on the overhead and projector and project this book here, and I'll just show you how I get here. I go to chapter contents, and then I can pick where I want to go, which is I'm going to go to chapter 1, and those kinds of things give us some other options that I can do. I can do homework and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just going to go to the chapter opener here. And it's going to go to the online book. It definitely could take longer depending on your internet connection speed. But now I have this set to, you can change the view percentage, those kinds of things. And usually when I'm teaching in class or on video, I will link this to say to give me a whiteboard view. Before I do that, though, I'll explain a few things that are here. You can make notes, you can highlight stuff, you can do almost everything you can do on paper. There's a possibility to work on that, so it's and I guess I'm not real clear on, I'm pretty sure it saves those notes for your time on this online version of this thing. So if you like to do that, there's some possibilities to do that. If you like, a lot of people like to write on paper with notes, then I would suggest even you could still use this online book and then just have paper and write notes by your computer and do that as you're going through this. And I also, part of my goal is that hopefully you get comfortable with math books, and we'll talk a lot about how things are presented. There's usually pretty good pattern on how things are presented in math books. They're definitely not a novel, right? So they're really, when they start drawing pictures and putting boxes around things or putting different colors, it deems it as pretty important. And algebra is really a language in itself, that we're going to learn the words. You need to know the words, and also knowing some terminology and those kind of things is great help if you're trying to look up online help or even ask a question of a teacher. If you want to be effective in asking questions, you need to have some language. So we'll focus a lot on that as we go through the course. But so here I am in the book, and I got a cursor here. I can page through that. I can, in this place, there's table of contents, which is live, so I can jump to the different chapters here, and if I hit this little caret, it opens up each section or the sub parts of the chapter. And that's probably what I'm going to do a lot of times, is just at the beginning here I'll probably just run through this. This gives me enough information to try to talk through quickly what's in this chapter, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on here, but I'll basically trying to point out where you can find the information you need and how to use this online book, which is very useful, because I can do some stuff here. I'll show you here in a little bit, but as we're going through this, a lot of times when I'm specifically in a lesson, when we get to chapter 4 on polynomials, I'll shut down all this external view stuff and go to this whiteboard view like this, and that just gives me more screen space. This stuff kind of small. I can page here back and forth and so on, and go through the material here. I have different tools. I can grab a hand here and I can treat it more like a real book and stuff. Okay. And as we're going through here too, I'm going to drop into the first section here a little bit and show you some of the tools in the book, but we're going to just drop out. I'm going to go through these objectives to review. So let's start paging through here. I'm going to go into this first section, introduction to algebra. You're evaluating algebraic expressions, translating algebraic expressions, and translating two equations. And these highlighted words, it isn't like, okay, hey, I gotta remember this stuff, and it's real easy to just jump into assignments and say, oh, this is what I'm doing. I look at an example, I see the pattern that they're doing, memorize the pattern, and then just apply that to the assignment. You're probably going to do okay on that assignment, because they do break these down into real specific things that you do. But the key is to pick up the language along the way, because it's going to build, and we need to understand what they're talking about. So that's what they're doing here. We got a lot of terminology that happened here. Variable, constant, operation, variable expression, algebraic expression, evaluate, substitute values are terms. And I'm just pulling these out of the bold text, right? And so on. Well, they go through exactly what that is. I just want to show this here. While I'm looking at this example, I can say, hey, evaluate this expression, and I'd say this is very valuable. They're going to tell you what's going on. They want to know what this expression would be if x is equal to 37 and x is equal. So we got basically two evaluations we're doing here, y and y is equal to, excuse me, there's one evaluation, but they're putting in numbers for each variable. And understanding what a variable means is pretty important too. So I'm not going to go into all the details, but just kind of point out things that if you're not sure what I'm talking about, that's a good place to focus in, because you're going to need them for 98. This is all review. But when I'm in this book in this way, I can be looking at this and say, do I get this or not? I can click on this, and it's going to bring up an actual problem, just like in your homework, that is specific to this piece of information that they're working on. And that's what it says up here. It says you try it. And I'm actually using Google Chrome. There's a whole thing about that. So they give us this window that I'm going to do that, and then they give us some a tool palette and stuff like that when you go through your first assignment. It's going to hopefully take you through all these things. Also, there's some things here um, which is kind of weird if I want to view an example because I'm coming from examples, but I can print the problem, I can help me solve this, and later on we're going to talk about when you're in your homework, there's a couple buttons here too. That one is ask my instructor. And if you click that, what it does is sends me a copy of the problem you're actually working on. Gives you a chance to write some text about what you think your problem is or what you don't understand. And it emails it to me so I can see specifically what you're asking a question about. So it's about the next best thing to actually being there live and asking me a question about that. So very handy as you're going through this. Go and say, oh, I think I get this, maybe I ought to try it. Okay, and so you have that opportunity to basically work as you're going through the book. And I think your best use of your time when you're working on your especially on your section assignments is don't skip going through the lecture. You might get a little bored with me talking on some of these things, but at the very least go through the book. It isn't like, oh, I got to read and remember everything. Look for highlighted things. Here is a very nice section on algebraic expressions. They made a table and they talk about it here, but they're talking about translation from English, which is a very hard language to translate into anything, even Spanish or anything else, because we use so many different meanings for the same words. So, but they're going to pull out some main ones like added to and and how that translates into algebra, which is a language, right? So we're going to translate English into algebra. So they're going to give us some things. Here's translations that amount to addition kind of problems or expressions, subtraction expressions. Subtraction doesn't use the commutative property, so you got to be real careful about order. Multiplication, words of translation into multiplication, which is this dot symbol because we use a variable x a lot. And division. Now division's doesn't have the commutative property either, so you got to be careful about order and those kinds of things, which is part of chapter 1 talking about commutative. Now I wanted to keep going. Here is another nice thing in this software that's there. They're looking at this translate each phrase into an algebraic expression. Excuse me. So here is an animation, and this is nice. This is a really nice tool. I'm not sure if my sound's set up right for you to hear it come through. It'll be coming through my headset, but you may not hear this. But I do want to show you this. It is basically a teacher comes on and talks through this specific section. And then it goes through basically this, giving you the text, talking about it, the stuff, and it's talking really is. So I'm not going to go through that whole thing, but that is a very, very nice tool, especially if you got into a concept that you haven't seen before. You can listen to my videos, you can do examples, you can read the book, but you can also basically like pull up a teacher on a whiteboard to talk you through specifically what they're talking about here in the book, which is a very nice, very useful tool. Here's a lot more words, all those kinds of things. So I'm going to go back to this view right here because I want to pull out these keywords here. We've been going through introduction to algebra. I talked about the commutative property a little bit about that. Commutative property is that the order can change in this operation, like for addition. 2 plus 3 is the same as 3 plus 2. It's very easy when they're talking about these laws to think, well, that's no big deal. But it is a big deal to remember what the name is. And because we're going to run into this thing and they're going to talk about the commutative all the time, those kinds of things. And we've been using the commutative property since you've ever learned how to do addition problems. They've been talking about changing the order is okay and all that kind of stuff. The associative property is you can group things differently and stuff like that. And it's going through this, these things. Definitely look at that. And probably the most important and thing we use the most in algebra, especially in this 98 course, is you're gonna need to know like the back of your hand, as if I don't know who looks at your back of hand. No one wears a watch anymore, but the distributive law and the distributive law in factoring is to really key to get that solid understanding of that, because you use it in multiplication over addition, but we also distribute to do that something called factoring, and we'll go through a lot about what that means. So this deal is talking about these three main laws: commutative, associative, and distributive laws. You need to be very solid on that. The other thing here, I see a lot of students, if you have trouble with fractions, and I know you're out there, it is time we fix this, because we've been handed calculators at different times. We've kind of a lot of students have just avoided fractions by going to decimal, which are really fractions, and not understand or remember the rules about multiplying fractions and adding fractions, dividing fractions and subtracting fractions. And you're going to need to know that, because yeah, I can deal with 2/3, and if I do that division, 2 divided by 3, I get 0.6 repeating. But it's always a nice question. I say, give me the exact answer for 2/3 in decimal form, and usually I get 0.666666667, which is an approximation. So factor notation, you got numerator, denominator, and some other stuff. They're going to talk about factors and prime factorization. Factors are parts of a multiplication. So if I have 2 times 3 equals 6, 2 and 3 are factors, and so on. And the product, another word we need to know, is the answer to a multiplication. So when they're talking about factors, when they're talking about what numbers can I multiply and get this result or product, those are factors. So they go through all this. Here's an example you can do on listing factors, those kinds of things. And why they're doing this, just to summarize this a little bit, is you need to simplify fractions, and you need to use factoring is really a tool to be able to get common denominators to add and a whole bunch of other stuff. Okay, so if you get that kind of scared feeling around fractions, definitely go through section 3 and get a handle on that, and it would be a good place for questions if you're having any difficulty, because you're going to run into these kind of problems like this, and if you don't understand, here's a complex fraction right here. This is the tougher questions on this fraction notation, so on. There's a lot of stuff about geometry comes up on some things you need to know how to get an area of a square or triangle or rectangle. Those kind of things come up in your deals. And then we're going to go through integers and real numbers. The number system, basically they're going to go through that. You need to know what those words mean. And they're going to talk about whole numbers, integers, rational numbers. Rational ratio means fraction. We run into fractional stuff all the time. Again, I'd say section 1.3, very crucial thing to get a good solid understanding, or it will bite you in a lot of ways as you're working through the rest of these classes. Okay. Real numbers, they're number sets. They talk about how they're defined. We're going to start drawing pictures of stuff, and because when you talk about infinities, it brings up there, how do I show a picture of an infinity, like whole numbers, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. How do I show a picture of that? Well, you can't write them all down because there's an infinity and so on. So they bring up set notation, and also number lines start going in here, those kinds of things. Real numbers and order and absolute value and so on. Then they start adding. So what do we do when we add real numbers? And we're gonna talk about this, man. This is if you could draw a picture of a word problem or any math problem, you should draw a picture. So they spend a lot of time teaching us specific ways to draw pictures of math and algebra. So if I got -4 plus 9 on a number line, that means I can start at -4. I like to say you start at 0 all the time. Negative has a direction to it, means that I go to the left. I'd go left 4, and then to go 9 units, that's positive, means I go to the right. I go 9 units, and where do I end up? I end up at +5, and so on. Yeah, I would say this is not the way you're going to add a lot of the times. They end up in grade school, middle school, they start teaching you some rules. If you have positive, negative, and you take absolute values, there's a whole series of rules. But I think if you can picture this stuff in your head, a number line, and think about what's going on, because when I have big numbers, like if I say 243 plus a -462, first of all, I know it's going to be negative. And if I think about it, I'm going to go to the right 243 and back 460, whatever I said, it's not going to be an additive thing. I'm going to have to take the difference of those, and I'm going to end up in left of 0 someplace, right? So when I think about it graphically or as a picture, I don't have to memorize a lot of rules. I got a concept of how that works, and it's going to guide you to get to the right solution. So, and subtraction of real numbers, and going through this, I'm pretty confident you should be able to get, or if you should be able to get through this review pretty quickly, and hopefully do well on this quizzes, because you're going to have multiple attempts. Okay. They talk about opposites, though. Again, be cautious. You can do the assignments by looking at examples and be able to perform a memorized technique, and that's definitely it's not the best way to approach algebra. Then they get into multiplication, and we got things with negatives that we got to worry about, and then they get into exponents. Order of operations are coming up, and we're going to talk about that. And it's kind of order of operations is, hey, this is how you're going to do all these things. Here's the rules. You got to have some rules so everybody comes up with the same answers. But they already talked about that commutative, associative, and distributive laws. Basically, those can override, I can change the order, right? So I can change the order of operations. I can say instead of 3 plus 2, I can add 2 plus 3, and so on. Well, we can use these laws to bypass some of the order operations limitations we run into, especially when we get into variables in the expression. Okay. Then they go through exponential notation, along with how that affects and where that sits in order of operations. Multiplication is multiple adding. Exponents are multiple multiplications. And that's what that means here. Was this base 5 here, this base, 3 in this case, means that 3 is a factor to this exponent number right here. So 3 is multiplied by itself 4 times, which is 3 to the 4th power. Just when I say like 3 times 4, which is definitely a different answer, is I could say as 3 added 4 times, which is definitely different than 3 times itself 4 times. Okay. So understanding what exponents do, and then how they affect order of operations is talked, and then that's pretty much the chapter we've gone through. And here is a very nice summary of the chapter. I can run through this very quickly. This talks about section 1, here's section 2, commutative law, associative law, distributive law, examples, and then this is kind of the what is the practice exercise. They just give you something to work with. Fractional notation, they're talking about prime and composite. Prime means that it has exactly two factors, one in itself, so 1 is not a prime number. Also, we're going to look at fractional notation. Basically brings up a lot of issues with division, because it really is a division. A divided by A is equal to 1, but I got an issue with what if A is 0? Division is multiplication is multiple additions, and division is multiple subtractions. So when we talk about dividing by 0, people get a little confused. I think because 0 divided by 12 is 0. What is 12 divided by 0? Well, that's undefined. And if you think about what 12 divided by 0, what am I really asking? I'm asking, how many times can I subtract 0 from 12 to get to 0? Well, I'd go 12 minus 0, I'm at 12. 12 minus, I just continue that for infinity and never really get any closer. It just doesn't make any sense. So it's undefined when we divide by 0. So when we have a variable in the denominator, that's the divisor, we got to talk about some issues with, we can't have that divisor be 0, because then it goes undefined. Okay. Section 4, here's your positive, negative real numbers. Here's a whole thing, running back. The identity property, big deal. When they start saying specifically of a number, the identity property of multiplication, which is 1. The number 1 is the identity of multiplication. And what that means is if I multiply by 1, it gives me back exactly the same value I started with. Now that becomes important in algebra, because we can't just assume, I could say, well, a times 1 equals a. Well, I say y. You can say, well, if I put 2 in for a, 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, great. But what about 3? What about 17? I could keep asking that question forever, because there's an infinity of numbers. So they have to go through a process of mathematical proof that they've done that says, this really is true all the time in algebra. That if I take anything times 1, I get the same thing. It's like a magic number that we'll use over and over in a lot of different ways to solve equations and all kinds of stuff. What's the magic number for addition? What can I add that doesn't change the value? Well, it's 0. That's the identity of addition. Okay, so on. And that's why they define those identities. And then we'll talk about things that inverses that give me identities and so on. Again, I'm throwing a lot of language at you, but natural numbers, whole numbers, integers, rational numbers. Rational is any number that can be written as a fraction. That's where they come with this rational ratio, a fraction of 2 integers. Now, if they define that, or of integers, and then they say, but that bottom one, or the denominator, the divisor, cannot be equal to 0. If they're going to define things about integers and you don't know what integers mean, you got a problem. So you got to know what integers mean. Okay? And then that's that whole chapter. So hopefully that'll get you through that first review deal and the first quizzes. And when that becomes available, I do want you to get through this homework. Again, I would, your goal should be get 100% on every one of these homework assignments, and get them right however you can do it. If you got to get a lot of help while you're doing that, that's better than not getting help and getting them wrong, because you haven't fixed the problem. Now, you might get it right and still not fix the problem of being able to remember what to do or what the concept is on a test. But I'll tell you, it's pretty obvious you don't know what the concept is when you can't get the right answer during homework assignments. Okay, so you should always try to get 100% on those homeworks, and then the quizzes, take them like tests, but you got multiple attempts to do that, and it'll really hopefully give you a very good picture on how ready you are for that chapter test, which will be, you can't use any outside resources when you take that test. So that's enough for this video, and I'll keep doing the next ones, and hopefully I'll see some progress on in the next couple days on your homework. So talk to you later.